Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get restarted with this next talk. Welcome back from your break, everyone. I'm going to be teaching you about enlightenment and what enlightenment is. Because now that we've discussed the life story of the Buddha, you might be considering whether or not you'd like to be able to make your way to this enlightened mental state. In order to be able to get to enlightenment, you would need to know what it is, so that way, as you're making your way to it, you'll be able to more easily navigate your way to this enlightened mental state. And once your mind accomplishes this enlightened mental state, by knowing what enlightenment is, you'll actually know that your mind is actually enlightened. It's kind of like if you were interested in going to some other city, you would need to know, like, well, what's going on there? What kind of things are happening there? That way you would be able to more easily navigate your way to it. And then once you get to that city, you'll know that you're actually there. So as we go, I'm going to pause a few times so that you guys can ask any and all questions that you like. Remember, if you like to ask questions, we have the microphones here in the white bowl. Just press the gray button. The lights will come on. Hold that up to your chin, and then we'll be able to hear you here. They'll be able to hear you online as well. And then when you're done, you can just turn off the microphone, and you're welcome to keep it with you, because then you'll probably have more than one question, or someone around you might have a question. And for those of you guys joining us online, if you have questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any and all questions that you like. So first, let's just help you to understand that to learn about enlightenment is quite a challenge for students, because it's not something that you've ever experienced before. So for me to sit here and explain it to you, you're going to know more about enlightenment after I'm done sharing with you over the next hour than you do right now. But just understand that you're not going to know everything about enlightenment at the end of our discussion today. It's kind of like if you've never had chocolate ice cream before, and I sat here and I explained to you what chocolate ice cream is like, you'd get a certain understanding of what chocolate ice cream is, but you're not going to really understand truly what chocolate ice cream is until you actually taste it for yourself. So it's the same thing with this enlightened mental state, that I can explain it to you all day long and you'll understand it more, but you're not going to fully understand it until you're actually experiencing it more and more and more. As the qualities of enlightenment are starting to shine through, you'll start understanding it more. So as we go, you're welcome to ask any and all questions that you like about this enlightened mental state. It is the ultimate goal of the teachings of the Buddha. That's what you're working towards, is this enlightened mental state. So feel free to ask any and all questions that you like. So enlightenment is a mental state that you attain in this life or at death. When you attain this mental state, the mind is completely peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. The mind no longer experiences any discontent feelings. The mind is steady, stable, it's unshakable. There's nothing that can shake up the mind. So by the time you get to enlightenment, you no longer experience any anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. All these feelings and others are eliminated from the mind. This is accomplished through training of the mind. It's a purification of the mind, that the Buddha discovered these individual pollutions in the mind. And then when you train your mind and you uproot those pollutions out of the mind, slowly but surely, you're going to see these qualities of enlightenment starting to shine through. Even though we say that you need to attain enlightenment, one of the ways you might think about it is that the mind is already enlightened, and all you need to do is get the pollutions out of the way. And when you do so, the qualities of enlightenment will start shining through so that you can experience enlightenment. One of the ways you might think about it is like there's the sun, and then there's the clouds in front of the sun. And when the clouds start to peel away, the rays of the sun start shining through slowly but surely, until eventually, boom, you've got a full, strong sun shining through. So the mind, it will have eliminated those pollutions, which is going to experience these benefits. The mind, by the time you get to enlightenment, it will be calm and relaxed, yet attentive and alert. Because sometimes when we think about calm and relaxed, we think about just kind of like vegging out, right? So the enlightened mind is calm and it is relaxed, but it's attentive and it's alert, right? So this is what the mind experiences. You can attain this mental state during this life, or you can attain it at death. And by the time you get to enlightenment, not only have you experienced the certain benefits that we're going to talk about here in a moment, but one of the things is that you won't ever experience rebirth ever again. The teachings of the Buddha aren't based on belief. There's no beliefs in his teachings. It's about learning, examining, and investigating his teachings. It's about reflecting on them to independently verify whether they're true or false. And it's about practicing his teachings in order to train your mind. But this cycle of rebirth is something that can be independently verified. It's not something that you would ever be interested in believing. You might not have the wisdom right now of how to independently verify this, but that is something that you can learn over time as you grow and develop on the path. There's teachings that I share with you to help you see how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. In volume 11 of our book series, in chapter 105, there's 17 different criteria that I help you to be able to see how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. Right now, you might be believing that you only have one life. That might be what you're believing, but you don't have any evidence of that, other than the fact that right now, you might not be able to remember your past lives. But as you go forward on this path, you might actually observe your past lives and actually start having memories. Some people do that even before actually training in their mind. They actually start experiencing some of these memories from their previous lives. So this enlightened mental state can be attained during this life or after death. Individuals in the human realm and in the heavenly realm, they can actually attain enlightenment as well. And again, even the 5 realms of existence can be independently verified. And you can also attain this mental state at death. The way that this is occurring is that the mind becomes free of something called craving, anger, and ignorance. We talk about this on Wednesday morning. I'm going to be discussing this with you. These are referred to as the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots or the 3 fires. This is a high-level way of describing the pollutions that the Buddha discovered in the mind. There's 10 individual pollutions, and I'm going to introduce those to you here in a moment as part of this talk. But when we talk about them from a high level, we talk about them as craving, anger, and ignorance. And you'll understand more of what that is when we get to it on Wednesday morning. By the time you get to enlightenment, your mind is going to be practicing the opposite of craving, anger, and ignorance, which is generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. The enlightened mental state is a mental state that you're experiencing in this life, but the path to enlightenment is a purification of the mind, that through training of the mind, you're removing the causes and conditions that are producing the discontent feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, and others. There are certain conditions in your mind that are keeping it in the unenlightened state. And when you eliminate those conditions, that's where the qualities of enlightenment will be shining through more and more and more. The conditions that you're experiencing are these craving, anger, and ignorance. This is what's keeping the mind in the unenlightened state. But in more detail, it's called the 10 fetters, which I'm going to show you here in a moment. Some people refer to enlightenment as ultimate bliss or ultimate happiness. I don't refer to it that way. Even though there's plenty of happiness in the enlightened mental state, your mind's going to be permanently happy, but it's a different type of happiness than you're used to right now. The happiness that you're used to now is based on some condition. If your boss gives you a raise, you might get happy. Or if your kids come home with good grades, you might get happy. If you go on vacation somewhere, you might be happy. This is called conditional happiness, that based on some condition, you will then be happy. But this happiness is not permanent. It arises, it changes, and it fades away. And your mind ultimately ends up in sadness, frustration, or some other discontent feeling. The happiness that you experience in the enlightened mental state is unconditioned happiness. It's permanent mental state. And you're going to understand this more tomorrow when we talk about the Four Noble Truths. But there's some people who are experiencing what's referred to as the jhanas. What a jhana is it's a preliminary phase that the mind goes through before you get to the first stage of enlightenment. There's 4 individual stages of enlightenment, which I'm going to show you here in a moment. Before you get to that first stage of enlightenment, there's 4 phases that the mind goes through. They're referred to as jhanas. And what a jhana is these are enhanced qualities of mind that you experience as you're making your way to the first stage of enlightenment. And when you're in this first jhana, there can be this bliss, this excitement that comes into the mind, and an individual will experience that. And there's people that are experiencing those jhanas, those enhanced qualities of mind, that these enhanced qualities are so significant that they actually think that they're enlightened, and they're describing what they're experiencing as enlightenment. So when you go out there in the world, if you happen to learn from other people, they might tell you that enlightened beings still experience sadness or frustration, or they still get upset, or they're still irritated or annoyed. I can assure you that an enlightened being doesn't experience any of those kinds of things. But there's people who are experiencing the jhanas, where your mind still is experiencing those types of things, who are thinking that they are enlightened, and they're describing what they're experiencing as enlightenment. So people get really confused when we talk about enlightenment as this ultimate bliss, because that's actually the jhanas. It's not enlightenment itself. Enlightenment is where the mind is joyful, it's uplifted, it's cheerful, it's glad, and it's a permanent mental state. There's this happiness that's in there, but it's not the same thing as what you're experiencing in the unenlightened state right now, or what you're experiencing in the jhanas. In the jhanas, they're still experiencing conditional happiness, and that's why they describe it as ultimate bliss. So I don't describe enlightenment as this ultimate bliss. The advantages of getting to enlightenment are some of the ones that I've already been describing, which is the mind will be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. This is a permanent mental state. It's physically impossible for the enlightened mind to experience things like anger, frustration, sadness, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. It doesn't matter what's happening in an enlightened being's life, they will not experience any of these feelings, because the causes and conditions that are producing them have been uprooted and eliminated. Oftentimes, what an unenlightened being does is they blame these feelings on other people. You might think that other people are causing you to experience these feelings. But what you'll learn tomorrow morning is that it's your own mind that's causing these feelings. And because it's your own mind that's causing these feelings, you can actually eliminate the causes and conditions that are producing them, which means you can eliminate these conditioned feelings. As you're eliminating these pollutions of mind, not only is your mind peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, but you're going to have this focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory, because the mind is now performing optimally, where before, when the pollutions were in the mind couldn't perform optimally. So you have this fogginess, this lack of concentration. The Buddha refers to it as a muddled mind, that the mind is muddled. But by the time you purify your mind, you don't experience that anymore. You experience this focus, concentration, this clarity of mind, and this deep memory. You'll notice by getting to enlightenment that you have this deep wisdom about the path and about the world around you. You will have wisdom that other people don't have about the world around you. And you'll notice that you can be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful to everybody in the world. Right now, you might find that to be a bit challenging. There might be certain situations where you struggle to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful. And that's only because of these pollutions that are in the mind. When you uproot those and eliminate them out of the mind, you'll be able to be polite, kind, friendly, respectful to everybody that you encounter. It doesn't matter what they're doing or who they are. You can be polite, kind, friendly, respectful with them. During your life, because the mind is now enlightened and you're experiencing this ability to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful to everyone around you, you'll notice that your personal and professional relationships are really blossoming. They're at ease, that you're not having bitterness and harshness and hostility in your relationships any longer. Right now, you probably have certain relationships that go quite fine for you, but you probably have others that you might struggle with. And this is normal, because the mind pollution, you have certain difficulties and struggles in certain relationships. But by the time you get to enlightenment and you clean up your mind, you won't have any of those struggles or difficulties in your day-to-day relationships. They'll be at ease. They'll be really blossoming. So these are just some of the advantages of having gotten to enlightenment. In terms of how to get to enlightenment, there's some core central teachings that you would need to be focusing on in order to make your way to enlightenment. And then there's some other teachings that you would need as well, but this is like where people usually start, the core central teachings. And I'm going to be essentially sharing all of these with you as part of this course. There's the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path. I'm going to be sharing all of those things with you tomorrow. The 5 precepts, I'm going to be teaching you on Wednesday. The Brahma Viharas, I don't actually teach you as part of this course, but the Harmony and Relationships course, I teach it to you there. In the group learning program, I teach it to you there. I do kind of kind of mention some of the things about the Brahma Viharas in this course, but I don't necessarily teach it to you the way I do in some of the other courses. The 10 fetters, I'm going to introduce you to that today, but then there's other retreats and courses that I teach you that go into detail with that. I'm going to teach you the 7 factors of enlightenment today, and then you're going to need extensive meditation training, and that's what you're going to get started with in this course, is learning how to develop your mind through meditation. So these are the core central teachings that you're going to need in order to make your way to enlightenment, and this is what you would like to focus on when you're first getting started in your journey to enlightenment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just pause here for a moment, see if you guys have any questions, and then I'm going to teach you the 10 fetters. Do you have a question, Marcel?
Test. Yeah, I just wanted to know what means fetters. I don't know that English word.
Sure, so that'll move us right into what we're talking about next. So the 10 fetters. What a fetter is during the ancient times, if you were a prisoner and they were trying to keep you confined to a certain area, they would put a shackle and a chain and a ball around your ankle. And that would keep you trapped in that particular area, like an open field or something like that. So a fetter is the shackle, chain, and ball. That's what a fetter is. So when the Buddha discovered these pollutions in the mind, he describes them as fetters because it's keeping the mind trapped in the unenlightened state. And as long as these fetters are in the mind, you're being confined to this unenlightened mind, experiencing anger and sadness and frustration over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Hugo, you have a question? Mm-hmm.
Mention about enlightenment after death. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. So you can attain enlightenment during this life, which would be ideal. That's what you would like to be able to do. Even if you get to enlightenment in this life in like the last minute of your life and you only have 1 minute to live, that'll be the very best minute that you've ever had because the way that the mind's functioning, right? So getting to enlightenment during this lifetime is ideal because then you'll get to experience the rest of this life in this enlightened mental state where your mind's peaceful and joyful, you have wonderful relationships, you're not being angry and frustrated, all that benefits that I talked about. But you can also, as you're making your way to death, an individual can shed these fetters that I'm talking about. Even without having ever learned the teachings, an individual can gradually start shedding these fetters without even realizing that's what they're necessarily doing. So at the time of death, an individual's mind could have experienced the elimination of these fetters, and at that point their mind is enlightened and they won't experience rebirth. They did experience anger and frustration and worries and anxiety throughout their entire life. And like I mentioned, the ideal thing would be to get to enlightenment during your life so that you can then enjoy that for the rest of your life. But the very next best thing would be to get to enlightenment at death, because then at least you're not going to experience rebirth. So if you've ever been around someone who's experienced natural death, when you learn about the 10 fetters, you will see that natural death tends to lean towards enlightenment because you start shedding some of these things. So like we were just talking earlier, you asked me the questions about the robes, and I was talking about personal existence view, about how the mind needs to get to the point where it doesn't have this clinging to the self-image and wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way. If you think about aging, as we age, that's one of the first things that we start eliminating, that earlier in our life, we maybe put a lot of time and attention about how we looked towards others, and we really were concerned about how other people perceived us in terms of our physical appearance. But as we age, we become less and less interested in those kinds of things, and our mind kind of starts shedding that. Same thing with things like ill will. Ill will can kind of be shed over time as we get older. Not for everybody, but for some people, as we age, we don't have that anger and hostility that we once had when we were maybe like a teenager or our early 20s or something like this. So these fetters that you're going to learn about here, once you understand them in detail, if you've experienced being around someone who's gotten to natural death, you can see how these kind of slowly start to fade away just as part of natural death. And now someone having died and gotten to enlightenment, they won't experience rebirth again. You're welcome. Marcel?
How is it if you die unenlightened but made it a long way into this direction when you get reborn? Are you closer to that state, or does it start again?
So when you're reborn, if you've done some work in this life, but you didn't get to enlightenment during this life, and you didn't get to enlightenment at death, if there's rebirth, there's going to be residual memories from this life that are going to help you in your next life. But you don't start right where you left off. Just like when you're born, you still have to learn how to walk, you still have to learn how to talk, you still have to learn how to write and read and all these other things. You're starting off at the beginning. But for some people, that becomes a little bit easier than for other people. Same thing, like if you're learning the teachings of the Buddha, it'll be easier for you in that next life because you've learned them in one life. So sometimes when people are learning with me here, the teachings just make so much sense to them. It's just so straightforward. This is someone who potentially has learned in their previous life, where other people, when they learn, it's just really hard. It's really difficult for them to understand the teachings. There's the potential that this person didn't learn these teachings in their previous life. So it's the same thing like if you've ever known like a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old who's never seen a piano ever in their life, and they walk over to the piano, they lay their hands on it, and they can play masterful piano right from the beginning. This is an individual who's having residual memories from their previous life. They have practiced piano, they were maybe accomplished piano player in the past, and now at 6 years old, even though they've never seen a piano in their life, they can put their hands on the piano and play masterful piano. It's the same thing as these residual memories are moving forward from one life to the next. And the same thing can happen with the teachings of the Buddha, that you will tend to find your way back to the teachings of the Buddha sooner, and it'll be easier for you in that next life. Mm-hmm. But you still have to do all the work in that next life. It'll just be much more straightforward for you. Okay, let me check if we have any questions online. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions online. Okay, so now let me introduce you to the 10 fetters. As I mentioned, the 10 fetters, it gets this name because of in the past, they would attach the shackle, chain, and ball to your ankle to keep you confined in a certain area. And when the Buddha saw this and he understood the 10 fetters, he referred to them as fetters. And we refer to them as pollutions or defilements or taints. This is the way to think about these, that they're polluting the mind's ability to experience this uplifted state of enlightenment. What I'm going to do is just introduce you to these. I teach these to you in other courses. At this point, you don't need to know these inside and out, because everything that the Buddha taught you in terms of what you're going to learn in this course, in terms of the foundational teachings, it's guiding you to eliminate these in one way or another. This is like the underlying thing that all of his other teachings are helping you to eliminate. At future time, in various courses and retreats that I teach, I go into much more detail in these. But you need to get the foundational teachings under your belt first to start slowly chipping away at these before you really focus on these in a lot of detail. But just understand that this is what's underlying everything. So when you're learning the meditation, or you're learning the Eightfold Path, or you're learning the 5 precepts, or any of these other teachings like the natural law of karma and things like this, it's helping you to eliminate these fetters. But you don't need to necessarily know them in detail right now, so I'm just going to introduce you to them. This first one is called personal existence view. What this is where the mind has confusion or misunderstanding. It thinks that this body is you or this mind is you. So you cling to a certain self-image or a certain self-identity. And now when the mind is being perceived the way you want to be perceived, you feel happy or you feel excited about that. So someone says to you, wow, you look really handsome in that shirt. It really brings out the colors of your eyes. And you're like, they're talking about me. You get so excited. But there's only a matter of time, because of your personal existence view, that somebody's going to say something like, oh, you look so horrible. What did you do to your hair? Oh, you don't look the same. Why did you shave? That looks so weird, right? You're going to hear some kind of comment like this. And then if you perceive that this body is you and you cling to this body thinking that this is who you are, when you hear this degrading and disparaging comment about this body, you'll be frustrated, you'll be agitated or annoyed. Or say you spill some food on your clothing and you're in a social situation, you'll be embarrassed because of this personal existence view, where the mind is holding on and clinging to this body, thinking that this is who you are. Then there's a certain self-identity in the mind, like I am American, or I am an Aussie, or I am German, or I am Israeli, or any of this other kind of I am, around your culture, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your job or occupation, your nationality. The mind can cling to this identity thinking that this is who you are. So now you're in a restaurant, and 2 tables over, they're talking about the place where you come from. And they're saying, all Germans are so lovely and kind and warm and gentle. Or all Israelis are so friendly and happy and cheerful. Oh, I just enjoy being around Israeli people so much, right? Or whatever it is that you come from, people are talking in agreeable ways to you. Because of your self-identity, you'll get so excited about that. Like, wow, they're talking about me. But then again, it's only a matter of time, 2 tables over, somebody's going to be saying something degrading and disparaging about the place where you come from and the place where this body was born. And now you'll be frustrated or agitated or annoyed. So as long as the mind has this personal existence view where it's clinging to a self-image or it's clinging to a self-identity in your mind will get shaken up whenever you hear contact that is either agreeable or disagreeable to you. So there's this personal existence view that's causing the mind to experience a certain amount of difficulties and struggles with discontentedness. Then there's something called doubt. What doubt is where you have doubt about the teachings of the Buddha and the ability of them to help you attain enlightenment. Everybody who comes to the path to enlightenment will typically have doubt to a certain degree. You might doubt the Buddha, his teachings, the community that you're part of. You might doubt your teacher and this person's ability to help you get to enlightenment, or you might doubt your own ability to get to enlightenment. You might think like, I can't do this. Maybe I'm too old, or maybe I'm too stupid, or maybe my mind doesn't function so well, or I don't have time for that. The mind's going to have certain doubts about your ability to attain enlightenment. Well, if you have doubt, this is going to hinder you from being able to get to enlightenment. But if you have doubt, it's normal. People come to the path to enlightenment with doubt. I had plenty of doubt when I came to this path to enlightenment. The way you eliminate your doubt is not through blind belief or faith. That's not how you eliminate your doubt. The way you eliminate your doubt is by investigating the teachings, by examining them. By you examining the teachings and investigating them, you reflect on them to independently verify whether they're true or false, and you start practicing the teachings, you will be able to see that they actually work. Because your mind's going to be becoming more and more peaceful, more and more joyful. And when you see the effects and you see the benefits to the condition of your mind in your life, you're going to know it's these teachings that are leading you there. So over the course of multiple months and maybe even years, as you're chipping away at this and you're learning the teachings more and more, you're going to be getting to the point where you eliminate your doubt. You won't be enlightened yet by the time you eliminate your doubt, but you'll get to the point where you have no doubt that these teachings are leading to an improved condition of your mind and your life. And you won't have doubt of the Buddha, his teachings, the community. You won't have doubt in your teacher because you'll see that this person has helped you to get to that improved mental state. And you won't have doubt in your ability to get to enlightenment because you're actually doing it. You're making your way to it. So you'll be able to see that the condition of the mind is gradually improving. So the way you get rid of your doubt is by harnessing it. What I did is I rolled up the sleeves and I sunk my teeth in. I was like, you know what? I do have doubt. That I don't anymore, but at that time I do have doubt. And I'm interested to see, do these teachings truly lead to where the Buddha said that they do? So you can harness this in doubt and turn it into an inquisitive mind where you're like, yeah, I have doubt, but let me figure this out. Let me see if these teachings actually lead where the Buddha said they do. And that's where you can harness this, turn your mind into an inquisitive mind, investigate the teachings, and that is going to lead to the improvement to the condition of your mind in your life, and eventually you'll get rid of this doubt. Then there's something called wrong behavior and observances. What this is that there's a certain amount of a lack of wisdom that you have around moral conduct. You might be going out into the world thinking that you have all the best intentions of the world in the way that you interact with people and the way that you function with people. But if you haven't studied the natural laws, there are certain things you're doing in your moral conduct that is unwise. The way that you're interacting with others, what you're choosing to do and how you're choosing to do it, there's certain harm that you're putting out through your moral conduct. And as long as you put out that harm is going to come back to you. So in order to get rid of this one aspect of this particular fetter, which is the wrong behavior, you're going to need to learn the natural laws around your moral conduct, like speech and actions and your livelihood, the way you choose to sustain yourself. You need to get to the point where you're not causing harm to others through your speech, your actions, or your livelihood. And I'm going to be teaching you this tomorrow so that you can learn about the moral conduct that the Buddha teaches you. Because as long as you go around the world not knowing and inadvertently causing harm through your speech, your actions, or your livelihood, this harm is going to come back to you. So by the time you get rid of this wrong behavior, you will have purified your moral conduct to the point where you're not causing harm through your speech, your actions, or your livelihood. This wrong observances, what this is if somebody thought that rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship was going to lead to some kind of improvement in your life, that would be what's considered wrong observances. So you need to get to the point where you understand what the actual problem is that the Buddha discovered, which is the main problem is a lack of wisdom. There's a lack of wisdom that the mind has. It has a certain amount of confusion or misunderstanding or this unknowing of true reality. So what he's teaching you is how to cultivate wisdom in the mind. And it's through this wisdom that you can then train the mind and uproot these pollutions and experience enlightenment. And there isn't any rites, rituals, ceremonies, or worship that's going to help you to cultivate wisdom. It's just not possible to cultivate wisdom through rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. So by the time you get rid of this wrong observances, you will know in your mind that rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship doesn't lead to wisdom, and it doesn't lead to an improved condition of mind. Whether you choose to do those things or not, those are choices for you to make. Maybe you're with your family and they're going out to the church or the mosque or the synagogue or something like this. And maybe as part of this family event, you go out to these events with your family. And maybe everybody's doing rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. And maybe you're even there too. But your mind knows that this isn't what leads to enlightenment. And this isn't what's going to help you to cultivate wisdom. So whether you choose to do these things or not is your choice. But you need to at least get to the point where your mind deeply understands that rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship doesn't lead to wisdom, and it doesn't lead to an improved condition of mind. And you'll be able to see that through training your mind and through learning the teachings of the Buddha. He helps you to be able to see this through his teachings. So you can eliminate this wrong observances through gaining that wisdom. And sometimes people actually have eliminated that part of this fetter before they even come and learn with me, because they know that I don't do rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship, and they've already done those things other places, and they can see that those things don't work. So that's one of the reasons why they sometimes seek me out as a teacher, because they know that I don't do these things. So sometimes people have already come to that understanding before they even start learning with me. But the Buddha is going to show you in a detailed way of why rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship doesn't work to improve the condition of your mind or your life. Then there's something called sensual desire and ill will. These kind of go together. What sensual desire is where the mind is longing and yearning through your sense bases for permanently agreeable contact. Your sense bases are the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. The mind is taking in contact through these sense bases. And what the mind wants and what it longs and yearns for is permanently agreeable contact. It wants things to be permanently agreeable. So when you're in your car and you're at a stoplight and you hear that person next to you in the car with certain music that you find agreeable, you get really happy. It's like, yeah, that's my jam. Okay, let's dance. Let's have a good time. That's because of your sensual desire. You're getting those pleasant feelings because you're having agreeable contact. But now when you go to the next traffic light and somebody pulls up to you with a different type of music and you find this music to be disagreeable, you might get frustrated or irritated or annoyed in the situation. It's not the other person who's causing you to be frustrated or annoyed. It's your sensual desire, that the mind is longing, yearning for permanently agreeable contact, in this case through the ears. And because you live in an impermanent world where things are constantly changing, you're not going to get permanently agreeable contact through any of these sense bases. So as long as the mind has sensual desire, where it's longing and yearning for permanently agreeable contact, in some cases you're going to get that. In some cases, you're not. So your mind's going to go up and down and up and down. So this sensual desire needs to be eradicated from the mind so that you can be content and peaceful and joyful no matter what you're experiencing. If you hear music that you prefer, it's like, sweet, that's really good music, nice. But if you hear music that you don't particularly usually listen to, it's like, hey, they're enjoying that music. You don't need to be upset. You don't need to be frustrated. It's an impermanent situation. This traffic light's going to turn red or green at some point. They're going to go on in their car and you're not going to hear the music anymore. No sense to get frustrated just about this impermanent situation. But as long as you have sensual desire in your mind will struggle to do that. And when this sensual desire isn't getting fulfilled, when you're getting those disagreeable contact through your sense bases, one of the things that can happen is your ill will can arise. This is the bitterness, the harshness, the hostility that comes into the mind. And this is because you're getting disagreeable contact through your sense bases. And now the mind perceives the problem as being external. So now you thinking that that person in the car is the one who's causing you to experience this painful feelings. Now your ill will arises where you have this bitterness and harshness and hostility towards this person in the car because you think they're the ones who are causing you to experience these painful feelings, when in reality it's your sensual desire. So this ill will can come up where the mind becomes agitated or frustrated, and there can be aggression and hostility towards others. And when you're experiencing this, you're just damaging your relationships. You're putting out harm. You're being unskillful. And now this harm is coming back to you. Then there's some other fetters here too. I won't go into these two now, but let me just jump to this one, which is conceit. What conceit is this is the arrogance, the pride, the measuring and comparing, putting yourself above people and putting yourself below people, thinking that you're above people or thinking that you're below people. This is like the boastfulness and the arrogance in the mind. This is where the mind becomes judgmental. It's like you go into a social situation and you're looking for a pecking order of who's above me and who's below me. Where this is coming from is our animal existences. Before we got to the human realm, we all experienced countless animal existences, and we needed conceit in our animal existences. In fact, we wouldn't have survived without it, because when we were in that pack of wolves, we needed to know who's the alpha male and who's the alpha female, because they're going to be breeding and hunting and showing us how to survive. We needed to learn from them how to be a wolf. And when we were in a herd of elephants, we needed to know who's the matriarch of this herd, because she's going to show us where to eat, where the food is. She's going to show us where the migration paths are, and she's going to show us where the watering holes are. If we didn't know who was above us in our elephant herd, we wouldn't have survived, because we wouldn't have known where all these things were. So by having conceit in the animal existences, it allowed us to be able to see this pecking order very clearly so that we could then survive and learn from other animals. But when we came into the human world, our mind retained that. And now when you come into the human world, you might be looking for who's above you and who's below you. And as long as your mind is doing this, you're not going to be able to reside with all beings comfortably and harmoniously. When you're being arrogant and prideful and boastful, people are going to push you aside. When you're judgmental towards other people and you're looking down on them, this is causing harm to your own mind. So to get to the peace and the joy, you're going to need to get to the point where you look at everybody as equal, that you're not measuring and comparing and considering yourself to be superior or inferior. Being inferior and having your mind think that way is just as detrimental as putting yourself above people. Because say you have a certain boss that you look like, wow, they're so far above me. And now you go into their office to talk to them about a certain project that you're working on, and your mind's all shaken up. You're all uncalm around this boss because you look at this person as being above you. And now you're not performing so well at work in your professional environment because your mind's all shaken up in this situation. So when you get rid of your conceit, not only will you not put yourself above people, but you won't put yourself below people. And now you can reside with all beings equally, where you can think of everyone as being equal. So even though other people might not think this way, this is what you're going to need to get to. That, yeah, there's a king of Thailand and there's somebody out there sweeping the streets, but these people are equal. Their role in society is different. The king does certain things and he has a certain lifestyle, and this person out there on the street who's sweeping the street, they have a certain lifestyle and they do different things. But our mind can look at these people equally and think of them in equal terms. So that way, when you go around the world, you can treat everybody equally. So that when you saw the king of Thailand, you might why him and say hello and how you doing, sir? But when you see the person out there sweeping the streets, you can do the same thing and say, hello, sir. Hello, ma'am. How are you? Good morning, right? You can treat everybody equally. Whereas if you treat some people one way and you treat other people other way, your mind's going to be constantly trying to figure out, where am I in the pecking order? And who do I treat this way and who do I treat that way? And your mind's going to become very confused. But if you can get to a point where you just treat everybody the same, your mind can be at ease, because now you can go around the world functioning in the same way towards all people. You don't have to be figuring out who's above me and who's below me, because now it's going to be very difficult for you to function in this kind of environment. Then there's something called ignorance. What ignorance is this is where the mind is lacking wisdom about the natural laws of existence. Most people refer to this as ignorance. I like the phrase unknowing of true reality, because the word ignorance is kind of like a derogatory, degrading, and demeaning way to refer to somebody. I would never refer to someone as ignorant, and I know the Buddha wouldn't have done that either. But remember, people are translating his words. A better way to think about this is confusion or misunderstanding or misperception, the lack of wisdom, the unknowing of true reality. The mind doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. So you go out into the world and you function in a certain way based on this lack of wisdom, and now you're making unwise decisions without even realizing that's what you're actually doing. So it's this lack of wisdom that is actually keeping all the other fetters in place. If it wasn't for this lack of wisdom, your mind would actually already be enlightened, right? But it's this lack of wisdom, this unknowing of true reality, not knowing things like the three universal truths, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the natural law of karma, all these other teachings that you're going to learn. The mind lacks wisdom of these things, so therefore it goes out into the world with this lack of wisdom, making unwise decisions and damaging your relationships. And now you struggle and have difficulties in the world because you just don't understand what you don't understand. Anytime you're struggling and having difficulties in the world, it's because of this lack of wisdom. There's just certain wisdom that you haven't learned yet. And when you arise wisdom in the mind, then you can actually experience improved results in your day-to-day life. So everything the Buddha is teaching you in one way or another is coming back to the cultivation of wisdom, because that's what's going to help you to ultimately get to this enlightened mental state. So these are the 10 fetters, and I introduced you to most of these, but some of these you'll learn at other times. What I do in some other courses and retreats is I teach you what the fetter is, I teach you what the symptoms of it are, I teach you how to eliminate it, and I teach you how to know that you've actually eliminated it. And that's something that you're going to need to learn later. In a foundational program like this, you just need to get started. So that's why I'm introducing you to this. And then I'm going to teach you all the different things that are going to lead to the elimination of this over the course of multiple learning programs that you might choose to take. Okay, as somebody's choosing to eliminate these 10 fetters, their mind's going to move through the 4 stages of enlightenment. We refer to them as the first, second, third, and fourth stage of enlightenment, but during the lifetime of the Buddha, they had other ways to refer to them. They were called stream enter, once returner, non-returner, and arahant. And it does help to understand this, because for example, a stream enterer. This is the first stage of enlightenment. It's referred to as a stream enterer because just like the log that enters the stream, it's going to eventually get to the ocean. It's just a matter of time. The same thing is true that once you get to the first stage of enlightenment, it's only a matter of time before you get to enlightenment. You will get to enlightenment. Either in this life or some future life, you are going to get to enlightenment, just like that log that enters the stream. A once returner, if you die in this stage of enlightenment, you're going to come back into this world one more time, and then you will get to enlightenment in that life. So some of you guys might have been a once returner in your previous life, and now you were reborn into this life, and it's your time to actually get to enlightenment. And then there's a non-returner. This is the third stage of enlightenment, where if you die in this stage of enlightenment, you won't come back to the human world. You will be reborn into the heavenly world, and then from there, you will actually get to enlightenment. Then there's this term arahant. What this is an individual who's completely purified their mind of all the 10 fetters. They are enlightened. So what we would say is this is an enlightened being, someone who's in the fourth stage of enlightenment. But they refer to this person as an arahant. Then there's something called a Buddha, which I will teach you guys. This isn't a stage of enlightenment. This is a unique type of individual who is enlightened, but they've done it in a unique way. So I'll explain that to you. So as somebody's eliminating these fetters, they're going to move through these stages of enlightenment. Once somebody's eliminated the first, second, and third fetter, their mind will be in the first stage of enlightenment. And if you die in that stage of enlightenment, you will come back to the human world no more than 7 times. And again, some of you guys might have been in this stage of enlightenment in the past. You'll know that you're in this stage of enlightenment because your discontentedness will have significantly reduced. It'll be just a mere fraction of what it once was. So if you were angry and frustrated and irritated and annoyed, having difficult relationships, by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment, a good deal of that has been cleaned up, where you're no longer experiencing the high highs and the low lows. Your mind has come into the middle a bit more, where you're not experiencing significant discontentedness any longer. Then there's a once returner. A once returner has already eliminated the first 3 fetters, but they've greatly thinned out the 4th and 5th one, sensual desire and ill will. And because of this, there's been another reduction of discontentedness. There's less discontentedness in the mind because of this. And if someone dies in this stage of enlightenment, they will return back into the human world, and they will get to enlightenment in that next life. Then there's a non-returner. A non-returner has eliminated the 5 lower fetters, and this individual, if they die in that stage of enlightenment, they will be reborn in the heavenly world and get to enlightenment there. This individual is only experiencing discontentedness about once every 2 or 3 months, maybe even once every 6 months. So it's very infrequent and it's very insignificant when it's occurring. It might last for all of about 30 seconds, where this individual very rarely experiences any discontentedness. And because of this, an individual can become very complacent in this stage of enlightenment because you're not experiencing much discontentedness. It's maybe like an internal annoyance or internal agitation or frustration. And the mind experiences this very infrequently as you're going through life. You'll experience this very infrequently. And this is why an individual can actually become somewhat complacent here. But the mind is not yet enlightened. You need to stay diligent and dedicated to what you're experiencing and be able to continue to train the mind to get beyond this, so that now you can actually completely purify the mind and actually get to enlightenment. So getting rid of all 5 of these fetters, the mind will actually get to the second stage of enlightenment, referred to as a non-returner. Then by the time you purify the mind of all 10 fetters, the mind is actually enlightened, where the mind will experience the complete peace and joy and all those other benefits that we were talking about previously. The mind's been completely purified through training of the mind, and they've not experiencing any discontentedness whatsoever. There's no anger, there's no sadness, no frustration, none of that is being experienced in the mind, because the mind's been purified of all of these 10 fetters. And this individual would be referred to as an enlightened being, or during the lifetime of the Buddha, as an arahant. There's no discontentedness and there's no rebirth. Okay? Any questions on the fetters or the stages of enlightenment? You have a question? Yeah. Sounds like it's already on.
Hey. So, as someone who's, I consider myself an atheist, but I don't like that word. And I coming from a pretty religious culture, which I never felt that I could be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
That talk about next life and reincarnation, or that triggers a trigger within me that I don't know. I'm asking, and this relates to doubt maybe, but I'm asking how would you suggest like going forward with it, like I don't know, taking what I can and maybe not taking what I can, but just trying to find where to place myself within it, within the teachings, within giving myself to the teachings, but having something that's that caused me this resistance.
Sure. By the time you get to enlightenment, you will have confirmed the cycle of rebirth, and you will know that it's true with 100% certainty. Right now, at the beginning of your journey, you don't have that wisdom to be able to figure that out. But that's something that you will be able to do later in your journey. So what I encourage people to do at the beginning is just set it to the side. In terms of the cycle of rebirth, the 5 realms of existence, and these kinds of things, I suggest people set that to the side, because again, what's happened in the past is in the past. What may or may not happen in the future, it's in the future. It doesn't matter right now. What's important is that you learn the core central teachings and you work towards developing the mind with those, because you're going to see significant benefits and improvements to the condition of the mind as you're making your way forward on the journey to enlightenment. And then in the future, year and a half from now, 2 years from now, whatever you decide, then you can approach these teachings in a way to independently verify this. In volume 11, chapter 105, that's where I list out 17 different criteria of how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. But it's in chapter 105, volume 11 for a reason, because it's not something people need to learn right up front. So I suggest you just set it to the side, but just know that the teachings of the Buddha are going to have a bit of that in there, because it is true reality. It really is what's actually happening. But because of the mind's lack of wisdom, and yes, because of doubt, the mind isn't going to understand that right up front. But you don't have to understand it right up front. What you need to focus on is the core central teachings. So that's what I suggest you do to get started. And then in terms of God, since you mentioned being an atheist, is getting to enlightenment isn't dependent on God. God's not the one who determines whether you get to enlightenment or doesn't get to enlightenment. It's your own decisions that lead to that. So the Buddha did teach about God, but he didn't put God as a central role in his teachings, because it's not God who determines whether you get to enlightenment or not. He put you at the center of his teachings, because it's your decisions that's going to determine whether you get to enlightenment or not. So this whole topic of God, you can actually go forward on the journey to enlightenment either with a relationship with God or without a relationship with God. Just like a neighbor, right? You can go through life with a relationship with your neighbor or without a relationship with your neighbor. It's up to you. So the understanding of God is taught in the teachings of the Buddha, but it's not central, it's not primary, and it's not even something that you need to have. You don't need to have a relationship with God or even understand him necessarily, but you do need to get to a point where you don't have anger and hatred towards this being. And then lastly, what I'll share is that, yes, going through life, being in a religious environment and whatever it was that you were exposed to growing up, our mind gets conditioned to think a certain way and have certain perceptions, not just about religion, but about other things. Like when I was growing up, one of the things that I learned is like my mom, whenever she would encounter something that she didn't particularly like, she would get angry and bitter and harsh and hostile. So my mind was conditioned to think that when I encounter something that I don't like, become angry, bitter, harsh, and hostile, and then you'll get what you want, right? So our mind's been conditioned this way about many different topics. And we need to be able to see that that is part of what the Buddha is teaching you to eliminate. is these perceptions that the mind clings to and what it holds on to. So if you were in a religious environment where people were kind of pushing God on you or pushing religious ceremonies and rituals and things like this, or whatever else might have been going on in those environments, your mind might have been conditioned to think a certain way and hold on to certain perceptions. And more you're going to need to learn how to get rid of that and let that go and approach the teachings of the Buddha as a new thing, where you're looking to cultivate wisdom and you're not looking to believe anything about the teachings. And when you hear things like the hell realm, the heavenly realm, things like this, the cycle of rebirth, you just know, like, okay, the Buddha taught those things, but now's not the time for me to be able to look at that. And don't allow anything that you learned in the past about those things to come into your mind and influence what you're learning and growing and developing today about these particular teachings. Yep. So that helps you to get rid of that conditioning and to be able to just go forward kind of like with a clean slate, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Looks like Adrian has a question.
So you were saying that if you were a stream enterer or like a once returner, that you would have memories like that. So obviously, like if you were a stream enterer, right, like the first, or a non-returner, or a once returner, you would have come into contact with the first three, right, and eliminated the first three in the previous life. Mm-hmm. But you wouldn't come straight back into the next life like having those things eliminated, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
When you're reborn, you're going to have all 10 fetters again. But they're not going to be as deeply rooted. And some of that wisdom that you learned in your previous life is going to help you in this life to be able to uproot what is left or what is there from this life. It'll help you to uproot it more easily. Yeah. And then you'll be able to more easily get back to these teachings too. So like people coming to these teachings so early in life, like I think you're in your 30s, you know, this is kind of indicative of someone who's actually learned these teachings in a past life. Particularly if somebody finds it pretty easy and pretty straightforward to learn these teachings, this can be someone who's learned the teachings in the past life. Where when we come to these teachings much later in life, maybe in our 60s, 70s, or 80s, that's indicative of someone who hasn't learned the teachings in the past life because it took them a while in this life to be able to get to these teachings. So this isn't like an absolute, but this is like, you know, kind of an indication for us. But yes, when you're reborn, even if you were a stream enterer or a once returner in your previous life, when you're reborn, you've got all 10 fetters again, but they're not deeply rooted as they were before. And you still have wisdom on board from before that is going to make it easier for you to be able to uproot those in this life.
Okay. And in reference to like being able to become enlightened at death, so for someone that hasn't come into contact with these teachings before during their life, how would they eliminate doubt at death if they didn't actually know the teachings during their life? How would they eliminate doubt of the Buddha's teachings at death?
Yeah, so what they do is as they're getting closer and closer to death, they're seeing that their mind's improving, that their condition of their mind is improving. Like my grandmother's a good example of this. She's most likely going to get to enlightenment at her death. She's 101 years old now, and she's had a little bit of exposure to the teachings of the Buddha, but even before that, you could see that her fetters were kind of gradually diminishing. And at death, you can get to the point where you can see that your mind has has gotten to this peaceful and joyful mental state where you don't know the teachings, like you haven't studied them, you haven't directly encountered them, but your mind has transcended all these pollutions where there's now this peace and joy in the mind, and you have no doubt that your mind is experiencing this peace and this joy that the mind is now attained at death. But you haven't actually learned the teachings in terms of like formal studying and formal learning. And that would be somebody who would get to enlightenment during this life. But at death, you can get to the point where you're experiencing the peace and joy, and you have no doubt that that's what your mind is actually experiencing.
Okay, so you'll have a confidence that you're experiencing peace and joy, but you might not necessarily relate it to the teachings of the Buddha because you hadn't been exposed to that before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, but in terms of getting rid of these fetters in this life, this is what you would look at, is getting rid of that doubt about the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, and your own ability to get to enlightenment. Because if you have doubt about these teachings, you'll tend to turn away from them and walk away from them. Where like what you just did was wonderful. Like you were like, hold on a second, we're starting to talk about heavenly realm and cycle of rebirth. This is bringing up memories from my past. Let me ask questions and let me try to understand. Where someone else might decide like, I'm going away from this. I'm not even going to, listen to this kind of stuff. And that doubt is what's going to hinder someone from being able to get to enlightenment, because they're not going to be able to learn and grow and develop on the path. So that's what the Buddha is teaching you, is that any kind of doubt is going to block you from getting to enlightenment. But the way you approach that is you sink your teeth in and turn it into an inquisitive mind, like what you just did.
All right. And that is also like a craving, right? Because it's an aversion.
Yeah, there's
I don't want to listen to this. Yeah.
Yeah, what the mind does is it's like stuck in its darkness, and it doesn't really want to do the work to figure it out, right? It's like pushing away the very thing that could actually be helpful for it. And the mind's not willing to take the time to ask questions and try to understand. It just is much easier in their mind to turn away from it than to actually walk towards it and figure it out. But ultimately, that person is actually going to have a very difficult life and struggle because they don't understand the natural laws. Whereas if somebody's like, no, this doesn't quite sound right to me, let me ask some questions and figure this out, this person is walking towards the teachings. And even though they have doubt, they're turning it into an inquisitive mind. And that's what you would like to be able to do in order to help you get rid of that doubt. Whereas if you push away from it, you're craving to stay in that darkness, your mind's clinging and holding on to what you currently think about the world, and you think that what you currently know is the truth, and the mind is unwilling to be able to consider something else. That oftentimes when people come here and learn, and I start teaching about how your own mind is causing your own painful feelings like anger, sadness, and frustration, sometimes people are like, no, like my mom's the one who makes me angry, or my dad's the one who makes me angry. They just don't want to hear anything else other than what their mind's currently holding on to. So there's a certain clinging and craving to hold on to what they currently think about the world, rather than shatter through that doubt and be able to actually make real progress. So there's craving in there that's keeping their mind holding on to what they currently think about the world, and it's hindered from making any progress on the path.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have exactly problems with that sometimes. Yesterday I had that again, that I'm completely concentrated just on bad things in my past and parents and things. The thing is, I know that my mind is playing tricks on me, but when it gets too heavy, I come not out of that again. It was like either I need a hit in my face or something. It's so heavily that I cannot stop to think in these dogments. I know that I have to go out, but meditation or something is, in this moment, absolutely not possible. It's just running or something else, something heavy I have to do. And maybe you have an advice for me how to achieve that better, because when I'm in this mode, I come not out anymore without.
That's perfect, actually. That's what I teach, is that when you're early in practice like this, your mind isn't very well matured. It isn't very well disciplined. So what you do is you redirect the mind to something else. So when you see the unwholesomeness come up, that's your mindfulness, that you see that, and then you apply right effort, which you already know this because you learned in the last course, is you apply right effort to cut off and let that go, which ultimately you'll be able to do internally within your own mind through maturing your mind and becoming more disciplined. But now, since your mind's not there, where your mind is not disciplined and matured, you can redirect it towards a bike ride, going to the gym, going to do Muay Thai. I think you do Muay Thai. You can go to the park, you can go to the movies, go to the mall. You can redirect it to kind of snap the mind out of that destructive thinking, because that's what you're trying to do, is essentially rewire the mind so that it doesn't keep dwelling in this, destructive thinking, these destructive patterns. So what you're doing is actually perfect. But just understand, you're going to be experiencing some of these things for a while. You're not going to just snap your fingers and instantly have better thoughts in your mind. So you're going to need to actively direct the mind towards something else and actively be training the mind with the Eightfold Path so that it can mature, become more disciplined, become to the point where you've accumulated more benefits in your mind, that your mind has more control, that you have more control over your mind. But for now, what you're doing is perfect. That's what I would recommend. Mm-hmm. Okay. So continuing on, we were talking a little bit about what a Buddha is, which is the first three criteria here. That a Buddha is an individual who's attained enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing those independently discovered teachings with countless people, and countless people get to enlightenment. And then they preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people are going to get to enlightenment after their death. This individual is an arahant. They are an enlightened being, but they've done it in a unique way, that they've gotten to it by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. So they've purified their mind, but they've done it without the help of any teachers or any guides. So these are the main three criteria of what make a Buddha a Buddha. Then an individual who is going to become a Buddha will have a profound memory. They can remember countless details about their current life and their past lives too. And this is what allows them to get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides, because they have this profound memory. So for example, you have like a certain limited capacity in your mind. It's like a hard drive that you might have 500 gigabytes or 1 terabyte or something like this. And that's why, like right now, in the last 5 years or so, you can remember pretty much all the things that you've been doing in the last 5 or 10 years. But if you go back to your childhood and you start thinking about your childhood, you just have spotty memories where you just kind of remember a couple of things here and there. And that's because you've had to delete those old files in order to store these new files, because you have a limited capacity in your mind. But an individual who's going to become a Buddha, they don't have that limited capacity. They have an unlimited capacity. They can remember countless details about their previous lives and their current life too. And now they accumulate all that wisdom into their last life, where they now are able to put that together and actually get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They also can quickly determine the condition of someone's mind by spending time with them. That an individual who's a Buddha is going to be very successful at helping students to be able to get to enlightenment, because they can observe the quality of their student's mind and then offer them teachings that are going to be able to help them. But they don't do that in an unsolicited way. They only do that when their students are soliciting guidance and asking for help. Then a Buddha is a deep practitioner of their teachings. Whatever they're teaching, they're also practicing those same things, because a Buddha is wise enough to understand that their students learn just as much through their spoken words as they do through their actions. So through their actions, they're helping their students to actually learn, and the students are observing that individual. So if a Buddha is teaching to be polite, kind, friendly, respectful to people, they're going to be practicing that. They're going to be polite, kind, friendly, respectful to people. So you'll see them teaching right speech and practicing right speech. So that way their students can be learning not only from their spoken words, but from their actions as well. We refer to this person as a fully, perfectly enlightened one, because by the time they get to enlightenment, they know the path very, very well, very, very clearly. It's like they spend their life illuminating the path and putting down candles along this path in order to make it very clear for other people of how to get to enlightenment. Whereas if you learn from a teacher, there might be certain things that that teacher taught you that didn't necessarily lead to your enlightenment, but you're still doing it. Maybe like 10, 15, 20% of the things you're doing, you got to enlightenment, but your mind still has a little bit of extra baggage in there. So an individual who's gotten to enlightenment on their own without the help of any teachers or any guides, they don't have that. Because if they try something and it doesn't work, they'll discard it and they'll eliminate it because there's no teacher for them to just hold on to this out of respect for their teacher. So this is why we refer to this person as a fully, perfectly enlightened one. Okay, and this is a Buddha. They're very rare in the world. There's sometimes people will tell you everybody's a Buddha, but the Buddha didn't say that. That's what people say now based on their conceit and their lack of wisdom of understanding what an actual Buddha is. If you look at the words of the Buddha, he explains to you how rare it is that a Buddha actually comes into the world. It's extremely rare. So the last one that the world's currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. Okay. And then one of the ways that I teach is I teach you what something is, but then I also like to teach you what something isn't. This is a way to help you to understand what something is by teaching you what something isn't. So this is how you'll know that the mind is not enlightened. If you experience conditioned feelings, meaning based on some condition, you're going to experience pleasant feelings, painful feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant, then you'll know that your mind is not enlightened. So if you get so happy and excited when it's sunny outside, and then you get sad and frustrated when it's raining, or you get so happy when your bank account balance is up here, and then you get frustrated and angry when it's down here, you'll know that your mind is unenlightened if you experience these discontent feelings. If you notice that your mind has craving, desire, attachment for other people to know that you're enlightened, you're not enlightened yet. One of the best ways to know someone's not enlightened is they're going to tell you that they're enlightened. So if you're somewhere and someone rolls up on you and is like, oh, by the way, I'm enlightened, then you know that they're not actually enlightened because that's arrogance, that's boastfulness, that's pride, that's somebody looking for glorification and looking for people to have a certain admiration of them, right? So if you have this longing, yearning for other people to know that you are enlightened, you are not enlightened yet. Also, if you notice complacency in the mind, where there's a lack of motivation, initiative, enthusiasm, or a willingness to do something, you don't have this vigor, this ambition, this enthusiasm, then you know your mind is not enlightened yet. Because what the mind does in the unenlightened state is it either chases and chases and chases and chases, or it swings all the way over to the other side where there's this dullness and this lethargic condition, this complacency. So if your mind's in either one of these places, you know your mind is not enlightened yet. So the mind hasn't come to the middle. By the time you get to enlightenment, your mind is uplifted, it's bright, it's radiant, you'll have enthusiasm, you'll have ambition, but you'll be gradually working towards things as a goal, as an objective, or as an interest. You won't be chasing it, and you won't be dull and lethargic either. Okay, so this is how you know your mind is not enlightened. Okay, then in terms of the 7 factors of enlightenment, there's these 7 factors that are going to actually be tools to help you fine-tune your mind as you're making your way to enlightenment. Sometimes people think that the 7 factors of enlightenment are to determine whether you are enlightened or you aren't enlightened. But that's not what these are. These are actually tools to fine-tune your mind. That when your mind is sluggish and dull or lethargic, or it's excited and overactive, there's actually teachings to be able to help you to bring the mind to the middle. And this is the Buddha kind of introducing the 7 factors of enlightenment. But here's what the 7 factors of enlightenment are. The first factor, which is again a tool to fine-tune the mind, is mindfulness. You need to practice this awareness of mind, where you're aware of what's going on in the mind. And then when you notice that the mind is sluggish or dull or lethargic, you lift it out of that by practicing the investigation, energy, and joy. Investigation is where you investigate the teachings of the Buddha. because as you're investigating the teachings, this is what's going to lead to you cultivating wisdom to now train your mind, and this energy is going to spring up in the mind. And then there's going to be this joy, this unconditioned gladness or happiness that comes into the mind. So investigation, energy, and joy is going to lift the mind out of complacency, because when your mind's complacent and dull and sluggish and lethargic, the last thing you're interested in doing is in investigating the teachings of the Buddha. So you would like to lift the mind out of that by practicing investigation. And then as you're learning those teachings, that's where the energy is going to spring up, and then you're going to see the joy coming into the mind. But then you're going to notice your mind is overactive and kind of excited in certain situations, and you're going to need to calm it down. And that's where the tranquility, the concentration, and the equanimity comes in. These are going to help bring your mind to the middle. And the more and more that your mind stays there, it will just end up staying there all the time. So this is a tool to help you fine-tune your mind. And the mindfulness is something that you're always practicing. And then you bring in these others, depending on whether your mind is sluggish or dull, or whether it's overactive or excited. And that's what's going to help bring your mind to the middle. These are called the 7 factors of enlightenment, where it's really a tool to fine-tune the mind. It's not to determine whether you are enlightened or you aren't enlightened. So any questions on this one? No questions on this? Okay. So, oh, you have a question? Yeah. You guys are welcome to take all the pictures you like of the slides, but just so you know, they're on our website. If you'd like to download it as a PDF, you can go to our website and click on free books, and then down towards the bottom, you'll see the slides. You can download them if you like, but you're welcome to take all the pictures that you like. So we're going to break here for lunch. And when we come back, I'm going to teach you guys Buddhist chanting. It's basically about 12 o'clock. So you guys can take an hour-and-a-half lunch break. And when we come back at 1:30, I'm going to teach you the Buddhist chanting. I'm going to explain to you the history and why you would do it. Then we're going to practice it together. And then we're going to put it all together with a meditation. So enjoy your lunch. And if you'd like to come back at 1:30, I'll see you then. Okay? So take care, and we'll see you later. Okay?